Okay, so we are going to get started. It's 12:01 here in sunny Southern Ontario. People generally on the line today are in Southern Ontario, although we see a couple up in Ottawa. They'll be far afield. We have some of our students are in Rome, in Yukon, across Canada, the United States. So Brad Ross is the Chief Communication Officer for the City of Toronto. Brad has had a long career in communications. Before that, he was at Toronto Transit Commission, a very interesting job. And he moved up to an even more interesting job for the current position that he's been in as well. So Brad's going to give his perspective from the Chief Communications Officer of Canada's leading, no, I wouldn't say leading, largest municipality, and what that's like to be able to handle the many diverse audiences that a CCO and communicator would have to deal with. So hand it over right to you, Brad. And if you have questions, leave them in the chat, and I will not be able to, in fact, do them because Brad now has the, well, I'll speak them to you as well, Brad, okay?
Well, what I can do, Terry, is I'll share my screen in a second. I'll go through a deck that I put together for this, and then we'll, shouldn't be more than 15 minutes or so, and then happy to open up to questions. And of course, if there are questions throughout, please stop me.
Great.
So let me see if I can do this right here. And play.
And you got it.
Okay. So Terry, again, thank you so much for inviting me today. We're into week 9 now of this what was first called novel coronavirus and renamed COVID-19, coronavirus 2019. That's when it was first discovered. And I've titled this, crisis communications or communications crisis, because this is unlike something we've ever seen before. Certainly we know, and I don't have to tell anybody on this, what are we calling this webinar? What a traditional crisis is. We have an identifiable culprit, be it a human error, or somebody has said something they perhaps shouldn't have said, a la Brian Adams, very fresh today, or we have a technical issue, whether it's a jetliner that suddenly has been grounded. It's an event or circumstances that challenges reputations. And generally, crises are relatively short-lived, with a recovery phase around the corner, typically. And there are specific actions that we can take to limit any damage as a result of the crisis. Of course, COVID-19 is a completely different beast. There is no single person or organization that we can point the finger to or lay blame at. There really is no playbook or past experience to rely on when it comes to a pandemic of this nature. Certainly emergency exercises can help with some planning. I'll get into that in a moment, but there isn't really anything we can pull off the shelf to help guide us through this. And, as we have all seen, there is really no timeline for recovery in the traditional sense. So how are we doing? Who knows? I mean, it's really going to take some time to really come back and look at how successful we have been from a communications perspective. So, our initial response, look, this is, as I say, this is not an oil spill or a hurricane or a CEO who's lost the confidence of their board in terms of traditional crisis communications. It is incredibly fast moving with no cure, and it laughs at us when we try on our key messages to help wrangle this thing. It's a virus, and so it is incredibly difficult to manage from a comms perspective. Nevertheless, we have to be available. We have to set the right tone with empathy and do all those things that we know we as communicators have to do when it comes to a crisis or an emergency of this nature. And what's true this morning may well be not true this afternoon. That's how fast it's been moving, which makes the response all the more challenging. So I talked about emergency exercises. This is like the emergency exercise from hell. I was on the phone early in the response with Matt Pegg, who's our fire chief, but also our general manager of the Office of Emergency Management, and who has been leading the response from the city side in terms of through the Emergency Operations Center. And he called it the emergency exercise from hell, because it truly is. Just when you think you've got a bit of a plan, or you're getting into something that you can sort of wrap your arms around, it changes. Inputs or injects, as we're familiar with when we do exercises like this, are seemingly far-fetched, but the reality is that they are not. The cliches of nimble, flexible, and unprecedented, and I wish we could find another word for unprecedented, but they're cliches, but they're true. I mean, we have had to be incredibly nimble and flexible in our response to what is this extraordinary circumstance we all find ourselves in. But the one thing that is widely accepted is that we don't have all the answers, and I think the public is understanding of that, certainly. So in terms of our ongoing response to this, we certainly state what we know when we know it, but just as importantly, what we don't know. These new concepts of staying home and social distancing that is now sort of morphed, plain language-wise, into physical distancing and self-isolation. These are all new concepts for the public that need to be explained, and that sort of forms and has formed part of our ongoing responses in terms of explaining why all of this is going on, in terms of, going hard on the message around, staying home to save lives, to protect the healthcare system so that it does not become overwhelmed. And the more we do this, the more we can return to, recovery and getting back to our way of life, to society, to helping the economy recover. And so there are these measures that we have to take, these things that were completely alien to us for the most part. This concept of social distancing that is now part of our everyday vernacular. And so that was part of our initial and ongoing response in the very early going, which for me started about on March the 11th, when the WHO did declare this as a pandemic. Certainly we have been working through this since mid-January with daily calls with our Emergency Operations Center and our Medical Officer of Health, primarily from an employee comms perspective for people who had returned from travel from Hubei province in China and Wuhan, and then Iran and Italy as well, and the need to, when you return from those places, to self-isolate for 14 days. So those were our initial responses. In the very early going, we did, just a quick little photo here of the front page of the Saturday Star in March with the stay home message, and we did buy some traditional media and in addition to digital as well. So, you got to try to find a bit of a rhythm, and everything that we have done at the city from a comms perspective, and frankly from the entire organization, has been solely focused on COVID-19 and responding to this. There are about 60 people in the strategic communications division at the City of Toronto, and we are fully focused on this issue today, and have been since early March. In fact, we were in the midst of negotiating a collective agreements with two of our biggest unions. We reached an agreement a few weeks earlier with our outside workers, Local 416, but we had a strike deadline of March 13th with Local 79, which is the bigger of the two, which are our inside workers, and included public health nurses. And so there was a bit of an overlap as we were at the table trying to find an agreement, and very, very hopeful that we wouldn't end up in a strike position while we were dealing with this pandemic. So thankfully we did, but we quickly, changed, brought everybody in, and everybody is now focused solely on this. I sometimes feel like I work for COVID-19 Incorporated rather than the City of Toronto. There's nothing else going on. So to find that rhythm, we need to, of course, to update our digital assets, not daily, but hourly, especially in the early going as things change so frequently. Being available, the ongoing media relations, particularly for government, who is accountable to the public, and the public turn to looking for answers, whether it's the federal level or the provincial level or the municipal level, which is where our Toronto Public Health and local public health units do all of that contact tracing. Showed you a bit earlier some of the paid advertising, traditional and social, and lots of multilingual as well. Very, very important to recognize your audiences. And so we translate everything into top 10 languages in Toronto based on census data plus the French language. And then trying to find some daily announceables, whatever those might be, whether it's for businesses, whether it's mental health supports, whether it's things for children, using our website. And we've done 2 major refreshes on our COVID-19 pages since this began, and are gearing up for a 3rd when we get into more of the restart and recovery phase of this. Lots of signage as well. So here's one of our very early signs. So we closed before the province, frankly, announced closure of parks across the province, not just provincial parks, but all parks. That everything the province does supersedes the municipality. And so the City of Toronto, ahead of the province, did close its parks amenities. It didn't close the green spaces, other than High Park, and I'll come to that in a few minutes and talk about High Park, but playgrounds and dog parks and tennis courts and basketball courts and fitness equipment. And so the green spaces remained open, but the parks themselves closed. And this whole notion of physical distancing, we tried to use some measures like that of a hockey stick, the length of a hockey stick approximately, to stay apart from others that are outside your household. On the waterfront, we erected these signs to do your part to stay apart, and use the length of about 3 geese to stay apart. So lots of signage. Again, a very, very tactical approach to what we were trying to convey around all of the messaging about staying home and the physical distancing. So in addition to the rhythm, you really got to try to find a bit of a routine. So employee communications in an organization as large as ours, 35,000 people, daily comms to our staff, whether it's strategies for working at home, lots of technological challenges, frankly, for the organization. So prior to this pandemic, there was a capacity, capability within our IT infrastructure for about 1,000 people to work online at the same time. They worked very, very quickly to ramp that up. So about 10,000 people now can work from home online on a daily basis. And so as I like to say, and employee communications is so critically important for government, because frankly, an informed public service is an informed public. So lots of work happens inside an organization as large as ours to keep our workforce informed about what's going on. And then the usual issues, tracking and reporting out and taking action based on what we're seeing online in terms of sentiment, solutions to problems. So I talked about High Park a few moments ago. High Park, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a 400-acre park in the west end of Toronto that has hundreds of cherry trees, sakura trees that were donated to the city by the city of Tokyo in the 50s. And at this time of year, they have a gorgeous bloom, and that park attracts tens of thousands of people every spring. So that posed a bit of a problem for us as we were inching towards its bloom period, its peak bloom, which can last anywhere from 4 to 10 days, and how many people that bloom was going to attract from a public health perspective, and having that many people in the park, making physical distancing a near impossibility. So we took the extraordinary step of actually closing the park to all residents. We had closed vehicular traffic weeks ago, but we took the extraordinary step of actually closing it to the public. So ringing the park rather with fencing, bylaw officers, parks ambassadors, and police. To ensure that people didn't enter the park, although we saw some evidence of that because we had a bloom cam, and this was a 24/7 camera that we established with our partners at Rogers to allow people to see the blooming trees. Or the blooms of the trees. They are also blooming trees because they became quite an issue for us to have to deal with over the past few weeks. But the bloom cam allowed people to log in and just sort of kind of like your fireplace channel that you might see around Christmas time, and so this bloom cam in fact caught a couple of young men who decided to enter the park late one night, beers in hand, and climb the trees. And so the camera captured them, kind of like a unintended surveillance camera. And but that aside, people did adhere to the request to stay clear of the park, thankfully. And in addition to this 24/7 bloom cam, we also had a couple of live streaming events with some arborists and First Nation leaders, Indigenous leaders, to talk about the trees, to talk about the park generally, and very well received. And we produced a couple of videos as well that are now online. The park has since reopened to the public, to pedestrian traffic. That happens Sunday evening as the bloom period, for all intents and purposes, is now past, and the weather has been very, very strange, as you know. So this, in fact, though, was, they tell us, the best bloom we've had in years. So it has been quite a year for sure. So we try to find solutions to problems, and the problem we had was Hyde Park, and so we found some workarounds using technology. And then, the leadership communications, and I think this is something I'll talk about this a little bit more, but is something that has really sort of come to the fore, I think, in terms of a, I don't know if the word practice is the right term, but it is something that has become quite evident throughout this entire pandemic. Whether it's the mayor, John Tory, or our medical officer of health, Dr. Eileen Davila, who wears a scarf every day and is, in fact, someone has created her own Dr. Davila's scarf Twitter account. So every day they post a different image of the doctor's scarf. But her calming words and her assurance and transparency, frankly, have been incredibly important throughout, as well as Chief Pegg providing updates on whether it's personal protective equipment and all that the city is doing to keep the city operating. There are, of course, other leaders out there, some who shall remain nameless, who have not helped, but I think for the most part we have seen really impressive leadership, and I think when all of this is over, I think we'll see, frankly, just how important leadership communications is through something like this. But there's always a but. Everything shifts and changes. I talked about earlier just how fluid this situation has been. Sadly, people are losing their jobs and businesses are closing. and we see more people continue to get ill and recover, thankfully, but we also see people dying, and we see outbreaks in what are called congregate settings. And we've all heard of the horror stories in long-term care homes, nursing homes, retirement homes, as well as in hospitals and in emergency shelters for those who are experiencing homelessness. Despite all that we do, we continue to have to deal with the actual pandemic itself and the impact it is having, and forcing us to continue to shift and look at what it is we need to do next. So what do? We have to react and we respond, and we have to redouble our efforts around our messages, particularly the stay home to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 and the why. And that recognizing as well, frankly, that people do need to go out. The weather, while it has been an incredibly crappy spring, there are some sunny, nice days. Today is one of those, and I think this weekend we're going to see some warmer weather, although the forecast calling for rain, so that kind of helps us a little bit. But nevertheless, we need to continue to redouble our efforts on our messaging that we're not out of the woods by a long shot. We need to be open, honest, and transparent with everybody, with the public, and with our employees. Because frankly, COVID-19 eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But takeout only, curbside pickup. It's not something that our communication smarts are ever going to be able to really get in front of. Frankly, at least I haven't seen how best to do that. So yes, it's a crisis, but it's immune to our traditional approaches to crisis management. So it is a bit of a waiting game still. We must and are continuing to let our public health experts lead and guide the decision making in terms of operations. It's like any illness. There's once we have a treatment, it's going to take some time, and the treatment right now is time. It is staying home. It is that physical distancing. It is washing your hands and as frequently as possible. And you're seeing more and more people wearing masks. Although masks, to be clear, protect others from you. Should you have the virus, you may be asymptomatic. A non-medical mask, for example, doesn't protect you necessarily from somebody else, but rather protects them from you. Should you have the virus. But talk of recovery is slowly beginning, as we know. Garden centers opened on Friday. Hardware stores, for example, which were doing curbside pickup primarily or only, reopened to allowing people into their stores on Saturday, and then on Monday, yesterday, retailers with street front entrances were allowed to begin curbside pickup. So that recovery is giving way to hope over fear. And Terry, you mentioned earlier that Bob Pickard is going to be joining this call in a couple of weeks, and Bob's done some research that, in March, fear was a key word, a primary word that was captured a lot in coverage around the world, and that has given way now to hope. And so that is something that we need to be very mindful of. But we need to practice expectation management. So if reputation management is a practice or a niche practice within our industry, I think there may be room for expectation management at this time as well. I talked about some digital assets that we purchased here, some from a very quiet, thankfully, young Dundas Square, but our stay home and stop the spread to save lives messaging and help restart our economy. And we have these digital assets are been bought on a number of channels. On advertising, let me just say that the province has done a significant amount. If anybody has been online lately or watching television, you see just how much advertising the province has done. So we are sort of letting them sort of take the lead on that rather than spending our advertising money to simply repeat those messages. We'll save that for the recovery piece as we get closer to that restarting of the economy that may be more unique to the City of Toronto. So, recovery, as we've been talking about, as we know, is a key principle of crisis communications. The government has imposed very strict measures. Our civil liberties in many respects have been curtailed. And for the most part, people get that, and they've been doing an excellent job in cooperating with that. But it's also going to look to government for relief. And certainly we have seen economic relief for individuals and businesses from the federal government, and we'll be looking to the provincial and municipal levels of government for whatever relief that they are able to provide as well. And that will form part of our, as we're calling it, the restarting, the recovery, the rebuilding, the reimagining, if you will, when we are out of the woods on all of this. But each jurisdiction, each province, each city is different. There is no one size fits all. Certainly, I think politically there are probably issues, and I don't have any firsthand knowledge of this, but I would imagine that at the provincial level that smaller centers in Northern Ontario, for example, who aren't seeing any cases, are under the same restrictions that a big city like Toronto is. In fact, the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, as well as Ottawa, account for fully 75% of all COVID-19 cases in the province. So understandably, there are going to be smaller centers outside of those, the Southern Ontario and Ottawa that are wondering why they can't, restart and reopen their businesses. And I think it's, the potential for somebody from Toronto driving up to Timmins to get a haircut may be far-fetched, but perhaps not. And so, asking people to continue to stay home and not travel to their cottages, for example, is something that continues, at least in Ontario. And we need to give we do need to give the public credit for understanding the why. And so it just requires us to repeat and explain over and over and over again to manage those expectations. So as I think I said earlier, this is a communications crisis, frankly. There really is, to find a strategy has been incredibly difficult. It has been a very tactical approach to this, and I know that all of you on this call, and certainly people who know this, but certainly people outside of our industry, love to come to us with tactics to deal with particular communications challenges, absent a strategy. And unfortunately, this has been a very tactical approach. One might say that the strategy has been tactics. I don't know, but I guess the explaining about what it is we're doing and why around the saving lives and staying home and protecting the healthcare system so that we can recover more quickly has been the strategic message, and then all of the tactics we use to drive that home. There is still no timeline. There are phases, and is it 2 to 3 weeks for phase 1 before we can move to phase 2? The frameworks that various governments have put out, but our wide-ranging communications approach becomes very challenging when you don't have a timeline. We thought early on about, for example, creating a direct mail piece to go to every resident in the city, and we were very close to hitting go on that, realizing though that frankly, by the time we do the writing and the design and the production and the mailing, that's a good 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And a lot will have changed, potentially would have changed by then. And so would that be money well spent, that something arrives in your mailbox that is really not of of much value. We're holding our powder on that one just as we get closer to the rebuild piece. As I said earlier, if there's something unique that the city can talk about, but the timelines do make it challenging for a full-blown sort of traditional communications strategy with all of those timelines. And so at the same time, waiting for that strategy, when you become risk averse, that will erode trust. We are out there every single day, every day at 3:45. And when I'm done this, I'll pack up and head down to City Hall, because every day at 3:45 we do our daily press briefing with the mayor and our medical officer of health and Matt Pegg. And so we need to continue to talk to the public and to keep the public informed about where we can currently stand, whether it's case counts or those announceables I talked about, or updating the public on where things stand with PPE, or what we're doing on enforcement, let's say, and on various measures, be it physical distancing in parks or non-essential businesses that continue to remain open for whatever reason. The old saw that today's news is tomorrow's fish wrap. Frankly, this is a communications crisis, because this morning's news is this afternoon's fish wrap. And so keeping on top of this has been a full-time job, certainly for the entire organization, and I'm sure for all of you. So, what is next? I think we can sit back, and I try to, from time to time, when I have slight moments of downtime, to think about rather what have I learned about myself and my team and our leaders overall. Do we at the city, do I have the right skill sets on my team? Do we have the right tools through all of this? And as I say, we're still in a bit of the eye of the hurricane, so it's going to be down the road a little bit more by way of maybe figuring all of that out, as well as our structure. Are we structured appropriately? I was in the midst, before all this began, of a restructuring, of a transformation. So I think, as Terry mentioned off the top, I came to the city from the TTC after about 11 years there, and I joined the city in January of 2019. Prior to the TTC, though, I was at the City of Toronto from 2000 to 2008. So I dealt with SARS, for example, which frankly was the sniffles compared to this thing, and it was really isolated to the healthcare settings. But when I came back to the city in January of 2019, and frankly, not much had really changed by way of structure in terms of how we did our work, how the city did its work from the time I left 11 years prior. So, I had brought on a consulting agency to help do a bit of an audit of what we do and how we do it, and to come up with some recommendations about how we might change how we deliver communications at the city. And was really just like days away from posting some new director level jobs when all of this hit. And so all of this has now been paused, and it's given me the opportunity to look back and think about what we may look like in terms of how we're structured and how we're able to and how we ought to deliver communications going forward. Not necessarily to plan for another pandemic, we hope, but just seeing how, in fact, we have been able to respond and what we may need going forward. And then, looking back as well as throughout all of this pandemic, are there any do-overs? And that's a common question that I have gotten. I've done a few interviews on podcasts and forums like this where people say, what might have you have done differently? And so if I'm going to be honest, open, and transparent with you, there is one thing perhaps I would have liked to had a better opportunity to do differently, and that is communicating the enforcement piece around parks, for example, and public gatherings. We have a call center, 311 call center, that people call, whether you have a flooded basement or a tree branch that's hanging over your driveway, or whatever city service you might have that excuse me, that you need to have addressed, rather than having people call 911 about to report, the use of a soccer field, for example, or, a party at your neighbor, people will call 311, and we created a separate channel online for 311 that was poorly worded when it was announced, and it came across as a bit of a, and I'm not one to repeat negatives, but I'll do that here. It had been framed as a bit of a snitch line, and that certainly was not the intent. People were looking for ways to let us know that that these measures that they were adhering to weren't being adhered to by, people in their community, whether they were using parks amenities or having big parties in their homes or something, and they wanted to let us know. Certainly we don't want to tie up 911 resources, which are clearly just for emergencies. So when we launched the online portal, which is just another channel from calling 311, it was poorly phrased, frankly, and that one was unfortunate, because we didn't want to create, and that certainly we haven't never had the intent of creating this environment where neighbors can report on neighbors. So that would be a do-over. Maybe I'm getting ahead of one of your questions, but I thought it important to get out in front of that one a little bit for you. So as we start to enter whatever you want to call it, a new reality or a new normal, there's lots, in the before times, there was lots of talk about change management. Well, this is change now. This is change that is happening at the moment. And we need to, and we have adapted very quickly. Can we continue to do that? That is going to be, I think, a question for a lot of organizations, frankly. And if communications isn't at the table, it should be. I report to the city manager. At the TTC, I reported to the CEO. I know there are still some structures, some organizations where communications, the head of comms or the vice president of communications or public affairs or whatever the title, in some cases report to a general counsel or through HR or through a chief corporate officer of some kind. Comms needs to be at the table. Our advice and counsel is as important as that of legal or the CFO, or if you're chief people officer, frankly. So for those organizations that haven't gravitated to that new reality, my advice through all of this is that they ought to, because as I say, as the spotlight in many respects will be on leadership communications. When all this is said and done, I can't fathom the number of conferences that will, communications conferences anyway, that will, and all manner of professions that will be looking back at this, and all of the books and all of the articles, academic and otherwise, that will be focused on leadership and leadership communications and how organizations reacted, responded, recovered from all of this. So today, as I said, very much still in the eye of the hurricane. We're still seeing community transmission, so we continue to respond and slowly starting to shift into that recovery mode. So, if response is here and recovery is here, we're sort of right about here now, and it'll do this, and then it'll become all recovery. And so, as I say, that our council will be more important than ever. I think the recovery side of things will frankly be more challenging in many respects than the response side. It was relatively easy, if I can say that, to close parks amenities fully. It will be far more challenging to open them up piecemeal if that's the way it goes, and making that messaging clear and understandable. So we'll be our leaders will be judged on the response, but on the recovery, and so we need to ask ourselves how ready we are, and how will we measure all of this. And I know certainly you folks, measurement is incredibly important, and it is, and it should be to most communicators. I think if we're to be honest with one another, communicators generally are not great at measurement. Impressions and the like just aren't going to be enough. So how are we going to measure what our success has been, and more importantly, where we could have done better? And so, Terry, with that, I will take any questions that you may have. And I'm sorry if I went.
Oh, no, that was fantastic. There are a lot of really good insights and perspectives that you've offered and you've provided for us. We could probably go all afternoon just asking questions about it. And I think that idea, the do-over, I think that's an important opportunity for us as communicators to really think about. What would you do? My classic do-over from Walkerton was an interview with Jan Wong. I would never have done or allowed the mayor of the town of Walkerton to do an interview with Jan Wong, but she successfully beat me down, and we eventually had it. And so a couple questions. Sarah Goldvine, who used to work for Toronto Housing, who's now out in Vancouver, and she's writing in and says, "Great insights, Brad. Could you talk about how you made decisions around spokespeople? Like many of us, I assume you have found there's a need to strike a balance between experts, technocrats, and electeds and media, for media, and a slightly different mix for specific audiences, vulnerable people. How have you navigated that, and how have you found it change from pre-COVID and during the course of the pandemic?"
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think because this has and remains a public health issue, I think it's vitally important that that the medical officer of health, the public health expert in the city, be the key spokesperson, a doctor, if you will, who, and I think we can all agree that for the most part, doctors have instant credibility. Not always, but certainly Dr. Davila has, brings that empathy to the table, brings that she's a great communicator, brings that expertise though as well in terms of public health measures, and has been able to slowly get us there from this notion of this thing called social distancing and what that means and why. So having the doctor at the table in terms of as the key spokesperson from the public health side was important. And political leadership is also important, so especially for government. So we see every day the Prime Minister doing his availability at 11:15 outside of I guess
Rideau Cottage.
Now his permanent residence, the cottage there on the grounds of Rideau Hall, and the Premier as well, and his key ministers, depending on the issue of the day, from Queen's Park. And then separately, you'll see Dr. Teresa Tam from Public Health Canada and Dr. Williams, the Chief Medical Officer of Health for the province, doing separate briefings. And so for the city, having Mayor Tory there, but also having Chief Peg from the Office of Emergency Management. So in the very early going of all of this, the mayor actually was in self-isolation because he had traveled to the UK just prior to really all of this breaking out in the way that it has, where when he returned, a new measure requiring people who had traveled internationally to self-isolate for 14 days or for 14, so he had been back for 3 days and then he went to self-isolation for 11. So at the very early going, our daily briefings were just Chief Peg and Dr. Davila. And the chief was there primarily because a lot of city services have been stopped. City Hall had been closed. Parks and Rec programs had ceased. We continue to pick up garbage. We continue to make sure our drinking water flowed and was safe. First responders continued to respond to 911 calls. So it was important to have to recognize that this was an emergency, that our emergency operations center was at a level 3, the highest level that there is, and that a few weeks later, the mayor declared an emergency for the first time in the city of Toronto. And so when he It just made sense because at the municipal level, as you know, Sarah, the lines are not as black and white as they are at the federal or provincial levels with respect to political offices and the staff side of things, the civil service. So and so we have those three as our key spokespeople throughout, and then we also have subject matter experts on issues that pertain to, for example, shelters. So our general manager of shelter support and housing, Marianne Bedard, who has been leading the effort to expand our shelter system. And when I say expand it, I mean expand it so that we can improve our physical distancing. Folks like Paul Raftis, who's our interim general manager of senior services and long-term care, because the city, while the city only runs 10 long-term care homes in Toronto, there are 84 in the city, and certainly we know that congregate settings like long-term care homes have been a hotbed of outbreaks and sadly a number of deaths. And we know from a public health perspective that seniors and people, the elderly and people with compromised immune systems or other chronic conditions are more susceptible to COVID-19, and certainly in terms of mortality. And so we would have we bring on subject matter experts onto our briefing. It's all done by WebEx, by the way. No reporters in the room. We have one camera that's a pool feed camera that provides the feed to the media, and reporters call in to ask their questions. So we've tried to limit the number of spokespeople on a daily basis to ensure that we have consistent messaging, frankly, and that those subject matter experts are called upon to provide that consistent day-to-day message that may need to be delivered.
Right. A number of people have talked about coordinations and your team, and you talked about it as well. This notion of having the right skill sets and tools available. So can you talk to about how are you caring for and feeding your own team? Because obviously if, this is a public health crisis, but it is being manifested in a public communications manner.
For sure.
It is the most, aside from healthcare professionals and essential workers, what we've seen now is that public relations, communications, management professionals are essential to the success of how this pandemic is dealt with. So how are you dealing with the team?
Mm-hmm.
And then what are the obvious skill gaps that you've seen, generally speaking, that you wish you had at the beginning that could have helped you up until this point?
Yeah, so I talked about nimble and being nimble and flexible, and we had to. So I immediately, part of I talked about the transformation that I was about to embark on, and one of the things that the way I was going to restructure my team was through the public side of communications, the employee side, and then digital, and then creative and marketing side. So sort of 4 streams. And so that's pretty much how I broke it up in the early going anyway. And so I had a team that is focused, managers who were leading various parts of the division, focused on the public side of things. So we've become, frankly, a bit of a news release factory, and it's not necessarily how I want to communicate daily, but there is this feeding the beast notion that is important. There's also the reality of working in a political environment as well, and needing to make sure that we are continually being as proactive as we can be with, as I said, announceables. So the public side is dealing with sort of that traditional media relations, but also all of the writing of the web content. We established a chat bot that went live a couple of weeks ago, and so there's a ton of content that needs to be fed there. We've got a whole team of who doing just solely social media and pumping out lots and lots of social, depending on the day in the announcement of that day, but also just ongoing reminders, as well as sharing content to maybe help people get through some of this, whether it's on the mental health side of things, for example, as well as all of that public health piece. So Toronto Public Health are a separate entity. They are part of the city, but they have their own team. And so we work closely with them on that content side. Then we have an employee side where a team are solely focused on employee communication. So we've done a couple of virtual town halls with the city manager, as well as the city manager and the mayor, so that they can address staff as well as answer questions in real time. I send a daily update to all 60 odd people on my team at the end of the day. Sometimes it's a wrap up of all that went on that day. Sometimes it's just a simple link to a fun video that I may have stumbled upon. Try to mix it up a bit and really just stay engaged with the team, because we meet like this when we meet. It's all online. So there's that, sort of keeping them as motivated as possible. In terms of finding, looking at what I wish we could, if I had today, what I would do differently in terms of skill sets, or I wish I had this particular skill set. Certainly we've been turning around some good content video-wise, but and they're really kind of just clips from the daily pressers. I think there would be more, I would do more creative things video-wise in terms of social content in a perfect world, but we're not there. Same thing with on the marketing side of things, the quote-unquote marketing side. While we have done and continue to do some paid advertising, and we do have an agency of record. I would do things a little more quickly on that side, but it has not been a very rapid response by way of advertising. I will say, only because of just the nature of where we find ourselves. And it's not a criticism. It's just if there's something I could do differently, it would perhaps look at the paid side of not just traditional, but also social, and how we do that, and be a little more nimble on that side.
Great. The infamous Martin Waxman asks a question: without revealing any secrets, then take this from a scenario. What happens as we move into a recovery, but it's still in this measured, very careful way? We see you, like I talked about with this restaurant in Colorado, where people all of a sudden take increased significant risk. How do you communicate about that? Because that's trying, in some respects, trying to put the genie back in the bottle, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the tone? How do you do it without, again, sort of using all this reputational capital that you've built up in that period of time?
Yeah, so we sort of started down that road yesterday, on Friday, with the reopening of curbside retail pickup. And so, engaging frankly with businesses, as the mayor has said on a couple of occasions, businesses know how to do business better than government. And so we worked closely with it's called TABIA, the Toronto Association of Business Improvement Areas, and there are a number of them throughout the city. And we had a couple of conference calls with them last week when it was announced. The province, and to be clear, the province is reopening things. It's not these aren't city decisions. So the province says, curbside retail can start on Monday, May the 11th, and so based on public health guidelines. So we get together with Toronto Public Health and set some guidelines, and try to establish some some parameters. And honestly, the grocery stores and the liquor stores and others who have been open have been doing it well. They, the lineups you see outside, they have demarcations for, they tape every six feet. They have signage. They have a security guard at the door. There's, and thankfully, touch wood here, we haven't seen these kinds of mass gatherings, if you will, at retailers. And so we published guidelines. A number of documents that are on our website that we announced on Friday, and one of the announceables on Friday, working with business improvement areas and retailers, and helping them, asking them, don't have, big 3-for-1 sales so that you're going to attract a lot of people to your store. And I think we had 0 complaints yesterday, day 1 of the retail curbside, and I haven't heard of anything today that's out of the usual. So I think honestly, we keep talking about this management of expectations of, we're not out of this yet. We ask people to please, continue to stay, within your household when you go out, and when you do go out, that if you're, not with somebody from your own household, that you manage that 6 meter, that physical distancing piece, 6 feet. So it's going to require continuous repetition of that message that is held up, frankly, by the public health message of, we're not out of this yet. We're still seeing community transmission. It's not just an opening of the floodgates. So I said a bit earlier, it was a little, easier, if I can say that, to sort of shut things down. It's not going to be quite as easy to turn things back on because of this very concern that you don't want to have this rush on things. And I think if we do it in a very methodical, very thoughtful way, and rely, frankly, on the goodwill of the public. And as I said, the public are a heck of a lot smarter than some people give them credit for. They get it, and there are going to be people who are going to continue to stay home despite all of this. And Amazon and Canada Post and the rest of them will continue to deliver goods to your home if you want to continue to order online. So the stay home message is still resonating.
It works. Yeah, well, Walkerton took 9 months to get the water back on. So, that was a small community of 5,000, and having to deal with that kind of expectation management was critical. Brad, we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for this very insightful and timely presentation. I want to thank you and your team for everything that you are doing for your residents in the city of Toronto and your elected officials, because obviously you're doing a good job, because we don't hear about any kind of faux pas or anything like that. So congratulations, and keep it up.
Don't speak too soon.
No, we're not going to jinx it. And I wish you all the best, and look forward to one day sharing a pint with you, just so that we can celebrate the end of this whole thing. All the best.
Thank you. Stay well, everybody. Appreciate the invitation.
Thank you, everybody. All the best. Thank you.